Thanks so much for coming to the Using Excel to View Your Assessment Results. This is the intermediate advanced session, and we're happy to have you here today. So this is who you have today. Our presentation team. Today, Mike Schwartz is going to be the one that's leading this session. He's going to be teaching you all about some of those advanced features. And then I'm Heather Jenkins. I'm going to be your facilitator today. And we also have Annie Wallace here from the New Hampshire Department of Education. She's your math person, and we appreciate her being here today. Just some logistics to get started. We first off want to thank the New Hampshire Department of Education. They are the reason that we're able to bring you this webinar today and for it to be free to all of you. So we appreciate our partnership with them. This is not the third in a series of webinars. It's interesting. The last time we said the same thing and I forgot to change it. So I apologize. This is the second in a series of webinars on Excel. We appreciate you coming here. You are muted. We can't hear anything. Please ask questions as we are going along. I will feed those questions to Mike when it is appropriate. If you put them in the Q&A, I'll be looking a little bit more at the Q&A section rather than that chat section. If you put them in the chat section, it goes to everybody, but I'll be looking at the Q&A to feed to Mike. If you put it in the chat, I'll look there too, but it's just easier for the Q&A. Big question of the day. Yes, you are going to be getting a PD certificate. You will also get a link to the folder that has this particular presentation in it. And you will also get a link to the recording for this webinar. So you'll be able to access that anytime that you need. I'll pass this over to Mike at this point. I'm going to turn my computer off. There we go.
I hope you don't turn your old computer off. All right.
Okay.
I assume you're hearing me. Yes. Okay, great. So thanks everybody. Thanks Heather for kicking it off. Thanks Heather and Annie for all the webinars you've been doing and helping out with this as well. I'm Mike Schwartz, as Heather mentioned, and I've used Excel for many years, and we did a similar presentation a while ago, and so this is going to be, for those of you who saw it, these are going to be similar functions in terms of advanced use of Excel, but it's always good to go back through them. Well, I'll talk a minute about kind of what we want to focus on, but I do want to just kind of get everyone back up to speed. If you didn't attend the Excel Basics, this is some of the stuff that was reviewed in the Excel Basics, and that webinar, as Heather mentioned, is posted with all our webinars. So by all means, feel free to go back and review that. For those of you who, either this is new today or even the Excel Basics was new, I can't stress enough, it's a lot to learn. There's so much to do in Excel. And so, reviewing these webinars is certainly a great place to take a look. So if you need some more refreshers, definitely go back at that Excel Basics webinar. If what I go through today is going to be fairly fast. So if you need to get more understanding or kind of review what I went through today, by all means, you'll be able to take a look at this webinar as well. I also, at the end of this, will talk a little bit about some other places to get some help around Excel, because the best thing to do when you're not sure how to do something in Excel is to Google, and we'll talk a little bit about that later. So some of the things that we're hoping that today's work can help, today's information can help you with, are looking at summarizing data. So if you've got different assessment data or different student enrollment count data or some other data about students or schools or whatever, and you want to summarize it, some of that hopefully will be able to help you with the tips we're giving you today. To do some basic graphing, we'll be doing some initial graphing. We will be talking about some shortcuts. So if you want to select 10,000 rows, what's an easier way to do it other than scrolling all the way down those 10,000 rows? How can I find support for Excel? I just mentioned, and then hopefully we'll have a chance for your questions. I'm going to try to go through this again fairly quickly, and hopefully leave a little bit of time to have questions as well. But by all means, throughout this process, as we're going through this, if there are things you're not certain about, if you've got questions, feel free to add them to the chat or the question section, and Heather and Annie will stop me. And by all means, we want to make sure that you're able to follow what we're doing. Okay, So this is the agenda. We're going to take a look at two kind of sample scenarios. The first one is where we've got a pre-test and a post-test. So maybe you did an assessment, modular assessment, or some other assessment across all your second graders or third graders or any sets of students in your school. You did that at the beginning of a learning activity, and then you did it at the end of the instruction. How can you take those two data sets and kind of compare them? We'll do a demo of that. So first I'll kind of walk you through some of the functions that I'm going to show you in the demo, and then we'll actually do the demo. And then we'll do a second example where we take a look at the results from multiple schools and look at how you might want to summarize and merge that data between multiple schools and then graph that. So those are the main two things we'll be doing. Again, hopefully we'll have some time for Q&A, and by all means stop us as we're going here. Okay. So the first goal is we're going to take data that looks like the data on the left. So maybe it's data where you've got item level data. Maybe you extract this from, some from NHS from Cambium or some location where you've got for each student, different items that they took on an assessment and whether they got the questions right or wrong. We're going to assume that we've got this both, again, as I mentioned, for a pre-test and a post-test. And our goal is to summarize that data and say, okay, for each one of my students, how many of them are struggling? So maybe struggling meaning that they've really not been able to answer that question or that standard for both pre-test and post-test. How many of them slipped? So maybe they seemed to get it the first time, but they slipped for some reason. So maybe there's something in that follow-up post-assessment that they didn't understand. How many improved? So they didn't understand at the beginning and now they did. And then how many people or students are really understood it strongly? They understood it both pre and post-test. To do that, to merge these two files, we're going to talk about things including right mouse clicking or using two fingers on your mouse pad. We're going to be using a function called Vlookup. We're going to be using an if statement. And then we'll also be talking about how you can reference cells, and when you copy and move formulas from one cell to the next, how you can make sure that you stay referenced to a certain cell. So those are some of the functions we'll be looking at as part of this demo. I'm going to go through this again fairly quickly, but first let me just talk about those in a little bit more detail. So when you're on, if you selected a column or you selected a cell, always try right mouse clicking, either with your right mouse click on your mouse or two fingers on your pad, and you'll see that you get very common popular functions that pop up that you can do with whatever you've got selected, and you'll see different things appear. So you got a whole column selected, and you might see things around copying and pasting and inserting. If you have a cell selected, then that might bring up different information, including a thesaurus. So encourage you always to use that right mouse click, that two finger click, to see what things that other people might frequently do and maybe a function that can help you. Vlookup. So Vlookup is a way for you to take some information like a student number and search through a larger file that might have lots of student numbers and find a match. And then once you found that match, you can specify a field that you want reported in that cell. So for example, you might be searching for a student ID amongst a spreadsheet of many student IDs, and you want to bring back the name when you find the match. That's an example of using Vlookup, and we'll actually use that example in this presentation. If condition. So an if condition says, if something in one cell is true, then I want you to do something. If the condition in that cell is not true, I want you to do something different. And so we'll talk about how you can use that, for example, to say, maybe you have a list of 1,000 students and you want to know how many males you have and how many females you have. One way you could do that is through an if statement, where you'd say, if they're female, give me a 1. If they're male, give me a 2, or whatever values you want. So we'll talk about an if condition. There's also something called Countif, and I actually pasted in this Countif S, which actually is even a little bit more, provides you a little bit more functionality. But the basic idea in Countif, it says, if a value in a certain range equals what you're looking for, then count it. And so maybe I'm looking for all the students who have a first name of Mike. And so I could select all these first names and I could say count if the value equals Mike, tell me how many there are. And we'll take an example with an example of Countif. And then finally, this is concept of a reference. And so when you're looking at a cell, and we'll look at this in these examples, you have a formula that looks at a certain cell. E7 is a cell, so E7 means column E, row 7. And if you want to copy a formula and paste it in other cells, when you paste it, this reference will change unless you put a $sign in front of it. And that says, regardless of where I copy this formula, I always want the 7 to stay as a 7. And we'll look at examples of why you'd want to do that. Okay, so let me go into our first demo. So I'm going to escape out of this presentation. I'm going to go over to my Excel. And we are going to actually start not with the spreadsheet, but we're going to start with this one. Okay, so here's my first example for you. We've got a spreadsheet that we just downloaded from maybe it's Cambium, or maybe it's some other tool that had assessment results in it. And when you download the results, it brings you back the name of the assessment, math grade 5. This was a post test, and it brings you back, in this example, it brings you back a list of items. It brings you back the number of points you could have gotten, and it brings you back what standards those items were testing, and then the percentage of students who got that right. And then it brings you back all the students, and a 0 if they got it right, or 1 if they got it, or I'm sorry, 0 if they got it wrong, or 1 if they got it right. It might be that it actually brought back the number of questions, the number of points, but in this case, everything was 1 point. So it brought back a 0 if they got it wrong, or 1 if they got it right. So we have a file that we exported. We have another file that's called pre. That is the pre-test, looks the same. And what we want to do is combine these two. And as we saw in the PowerPoint slide, we want to know whether a student slipped, meaning they went from getting it right to getting it wrong, or if they've got this strong command over the question, or what. We also, in our example, all we have is student IDs here, and these are not real student IDs. We also have a file that has a list of student IDs and names. And maybe this is a file that we were able to download from our student information system. So again, our goal is to combine the pre-test and the post-test. And so the way we're going to do this is we'll start with the pre-test. And I'm going to start with this spreadsheet. And what we're going to do is we're going to take the post-test, and we want to copy the post-test next to the pre-test. So we've got questions 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 from the pre-test. And then we're going to want questions 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 from the post-test. And we're going to do that because what we want to do is look for changes between one and the other. We can actually look across spreadsheets, across worksheets, but it's easier, I think, in this explanation, just put it all in one worksheet. Notice the questions are ordered 1 to 10 in this pretest. It turns out when I downloaded the file originally that it actually had sorted things by, it looks like % correct or % incorrect. So this is the question where most people had it correct. Everyone had a 1. This is the one where nobody had it correct. Now, what we want to do is I want, for my example, to have these sorted in the same order. So one way to sort these, and many of you might be familiar with sorting in Excel, is you can select these rows. And so I'm just going to click on the first area that I want to sort, and I'm going to drag that to the bottom right, what I want to sort. And you go under data, and you might have seen this in your basic Excel course if you saw that. And I click sort. Now, when you sort, it typically asks you which column you want to sort on, because it's going to sort on a given column, and it's going to put those items based on that column. It's going to put them the rows in a sorted order. So, for example, if I wanted to sort, say this is not really a good example here, but if I had something that the first row was numbers 3 to 32, and I want to sort these, maybe this was height of somebody's height or something. I want to sort these by person's height. Then I could select all these rows, and I would sort it, and I could sort it by this column, and it would sort these from lowest to highest, or highest to lowest. But what we wanted to do is we actually want to sort these columns from left to right. And so here, what I can do is select the section I want to sort again, click on sort. But if I go under options, you have the option here to sort left to right. And so I say sort left to right. I say I want to sort by which row. So I want to sort by the item number. So that's row 4. So I'm going to choose row 4. I click OK. And now all of a sudden it has sorted all this, but 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So now they're in the same order for the post-test as they are for the pre-test, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, up to 10.
Mike, can you just do us a quick favor? I think your screen is maximized. We have a couple of people just need it. Could you just make the zoom in just a smidge maybe? I think some people are just having a little bit of a hard time seeing what's on your screen. I see it fine. I've tried to have them maximize their zoom as well, but just in case. Thanks so much.
Okay. So I will try to do that. I'm going to get a lot on the screen, and I apologize. So it is going to be a little bit hard to see, but hopefully you'll be able to follow. And again, when you're trying this, I didn't mention this before, but we are always here to help. So if you try this later and you have questions, you reach out to us and we can certainly help. Okay, so what we want to do now is we want to combine the pre and the post, and we want to compare them. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to the pre, and we're going to say we want to add in the post. And so I'm going to copy the header records here, being the item number, max points, and or the item number. I'm going to copy this and we're going to paste it in the next set of columns. And so this is going to be our post test, and this is our pre-test. And what I want to do is I want to say, the other thing I want to point out is I've got 5, looks like, students here. It could be that you have 1,000 students here. And it may be that in your post-test, you have 1,000 students, and they may not all be the exact same students. And so what we're going to do is match, and to make sure we bring into this pre-test anybody that has a matching post-test. I could have done it the other way as well. And so what we're going to do is we're going to say we want to do what's called a Vlookup. So we're going to say anytime you want to add a function in, you say equal, and then that function name. And then you open up a parenthesis, and it automatically tells me what are the things I need to do for a Vlookup. So what we're going to try to do is we want to look up, and we want to find where the item in item 1 matches this student 19405,475, and we want to pull it from the post test. So we're going to look up, and we're going to look up the value of this student 194. And we are going to look for that student in this other file. So now we're going to choose the other file, and we're going to choose that student, and we're going to look up anywhere in this table. Remember, we know that they're ordered the same way they're ordered in both the pre and the post test. And now we're going to go and we're going to say, for that item that we're looking up, we want to bring back the second column. Because remember, we searched in a range that ranged from the student ID down to the last question, and we want to bring back the results that are in column 2. And we only want to bring them back if there's an exact match in column 1. That's what the false means. And so here we see what it did was it searched in the space from the post test. It's looked for 19405,475. And it brought back what was in the first column. And so 190,475, the first column had a 1. And we'll see the second column has a 2. So if I go back here to the pretest and I copy this formula to the right, we now see the 0 that was in column 2. Now I could copy this all the way down here, but you'll see these things NAs show. And that's because when you copy a formula, you've got to make sure that the references you're copying, this B8, the C8, that they're copying the way you want them to copy. And you'll notice that when you copy, if we don't put a $sign in front of these, that those numbers will increase. So where this says B8, if I move to the cell to the right, it says C8. If I move to the next cell, oops, I didn't copy that far. Give me 1 second. I apologize. I have to take an emergency call. Just hold on 1 second, please. I apologize about that. I may have one more text I have to do. But again, if you copy them, you'll see that the B8, when you move to the right, copied and became C8. And the C8 to M13, when you copy to the right, became D8 to N13. Now, in reality, when I want to look up a record, I always want to look up what's in column B because I'm looking up the student ID. So I put a $ in front of that B. Then what that means is whenever I copy this formula, so now if I copy from this cell to this cell, you'll see that the B8 stays the same both times. They're both times the B state. The other thing is that the range that I'm looking at in this other spreadsheet was C8 to M13. So remember that range was range from the beginning C8 down to the end, it should be M13. I want that range to be the same. Every time I look at a field, every time I do one of these searches, I always want to be looking in that same area. So what that means is I need to put a $ in front of the C, $ in front of the 8, $ in front of the M, $ in front of the 13. So now every time I copy it, that record will stay the same. The C8 and M13 will stay the same.
So Mike, just to confirm, we just had a question. In Vlookup, the columns need to be set up in a similar order, correct?
They do because what I am pasting in here, I want to match the first column. I want this to match the second column. I want this to match the third column.
Okay.
So the way we're doing it, yes, they need to match.
Okay.
So the last thing I noticed though is that when I copied from one to the next, this number 2 stays the same because it's not referencing a cell. It's just representing which column I want to bring back. So in reality, what I want this to do is I want this to be not always the second column. I want it to be, if we look again in what the range that we captured here, for the first question, it'd be the second column. For the third question, it should be the third column and so on. And so really what I want it to be is the item number plus 1. So here in this column, it should be 1 plus 1 is 2. This is the second column. Here it's 2 plus 1 is 3. So the third column, this is the third column and so on. So what I would do here, oops, sorry about that. What I would do here is actually say, instead of bringing back the second column, what I'm going to bring back is I'm going to actually highlight that, or I'm going to get rid of that second column. And instead what I'm going to say is I want to bring back the item number plus 1. So I'm actually putting a formula in here to tell me which column I want to bring back from my VLOOKUP. And so I click enter and it's still 1. But now when I bring it over, we'll see that it's changed here to be N4 plus 1. So 2 plus 1 is 3. So this is now bringing back the third column for this student. And so if I look at the third column from the post-test for that student, the third column, which is, this is the third column, it's the second question, but it's the third column, is a 0, and that's bring back. And so the next one it should bring back should be the 1. And so I go back to my math and I copy it over one more cell. We should see that. We should see the 1. Oops. And what I can do now actually is I can copy this all the way for all 10 of these. And I can copy it down for all these. Oh, and let's see, I did something wrong because we're now still seeing, oh, okay. So the other thing I did was when I said I wanted this to be M4, the question number, well, when I copy it down, now it's saying M5, M6, M7, and that was a mistake. I want the question, I want the column, the question numbers always in the same row. So what I should have done is put a reference here in front of the 4. So it's a $. And now I can copy this. And if you just click on the right corner here and drag it, that'll copy it. And I can actually just double click on this cell and it'll copy it all the way down. And now I have the post-test value for each one of these students. So we can see here, for example, this student ending in 1-3, we should see 1-0-1-1 in that order. And if we look at the student ending in 1-3, we see 1-0-1-1. So it's bringing back the same cells. I did this just with 4 students, but the concept is the same if you had 1,000 students. And so it would bring them back, very easily, even if you had 1,000 students. The other thing is the person asked about the order. The order only mattered because I wanted each one of these cells I wanted to know that it was always in the column, the next column. So this is M $4 plus 1. So that was that item number 1 plus 1 is column 2. Then it moves to 2 plus 1 is 3, or so on. I could actually change these orders. Like if this was question 7, and I knew that question 7 was always in the 8th column, then I could then they wouldn't actually have to be in the same order. And that was probably more confusing than it made sense. But I can explain it more later if someone has a question, or if we've got time. So the next thing I want to do is I want to be able to say, did the student's score change? So did they change from the pre-test? This person got a 1. Did it change in the post-test? And so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to insert a whole bunch of additional cells in the front. We could do this different ways, and it's there's not necessarily right or wrong, but for the purpose of this, I'm going to insert some more rows, 10 more rows, or actually more than that. I can do some extra rows, and you'll see why in a minute. But between the student number and this pretest. And what we're going to, oops, I didn't mean to delete. And by the way, Command Z or Control Z is undo something, just the way the undo button does. So I just undid it. So what I meant to do was insert. And again, to do the insert, I used 2 fingers on what was highlighted. And the other thing I guess I should point out is I wanted to insert 10 rows. So I highlighted, or 14 rows actually. I highlighted, I'm sorry, columns. So I highlighted 14 columns. I used 2 fingers to click down. So I clicked down and it just said insert. And that inserts those columns for me. What we want to do now is I want to actually say, did the student struggle? Did they slip? They slipped. I have to say slip. Did they improve? Or were they always doing great? So struggle will mean that they were a 1. They were 0 the first pretest, and they're still a 0 in terms of their score. So they didn't get it right the first time, and they didn't get it right the second time. They're really struggling. Slipped means that they got it right, but now they're got it wrong. So somebody still might want to help them. Improve meaning that they went from a 0 to a 1, and a great meaning they stayed. And so what we're going to do is we're going to take these 10 columns. And we're going to create an if statement. And we're going to say, what I want to do, and actually I'll put this here so that it's a little bit more, makes a little more sense. I'm going to take these column headings that we had before here for these item numbers, and I'm going to highlight them. I'm going to do a Command C to copy, or Control C. I'm going to put them in the cell over this right here. So I've got these, again, I've got the headings for the 10 questions again. And what we're going to do here is now we're going to say, we're going to put an if statement for each one of these cells. And so for each one of these students, we're going to try to find out if their score stayed the same or different. And again, I'm putting these in the same order, 1 to 10, so that when I copy things left to right, I'll just be advancing 1 cell as I copy them. And so it'll be easy to create a formula. So I'm going to say equal if, and I'm going to open my parentheses. And the first thing says, what's your test? What's the logical test? And so for an if condition, we can make any kind of test we want. So what we're going to do is an equal test. So we're going to say if the first question for the student was a 1, then we're going to ask another question. And so you can embed functions within functions in Excel. So we're going to say if that equals 1. An if statement always says if something is true, what do you want to do? If it's false, what do you want to do? So here we're going to say if it's true, if Q8 equals 1, if they got it right, then actually we're going to say if they got it wrong. Then we're going to say if another statement, if they got the question on the post test also to be 0. And so you can watch up my formula if you can see it. So if the pre-test is 0, then if the post test is 0, then we're going to say that they struggle. Then we put a comma, and now that's saying what happens if that's not the case. So if they got a 0 on the first, but they didn't get a 0 on the second, on the post test, then they went from a 0 to a 1, which means they improved. So now this inner if statement, we can finish by putting a closed parenthesis. And now we say another comma. So if the first thing equals 0, we did this. But now we're saying the first thing didn't equal 0. That's the other part of an if condition. So now if the first part equal to 1, then we're going to say if the post-test result was a 0, so they started with a 1, now then they're 0, then we say they slipped, or they slip. And then if they were a 1 before and they're still a 1, that means they're doing great. So now, oops, we have an if statement. And that if statement is checking to see if they struggled. I want to make sure I got my words right. And I actually should have said improved, not improved. Or if they did great, or if they slipped or skipped. Let me just make sure I got, yeah. So now I could copy that to the right. And let's see what happens. And so now we can see this person, oops, didn't mean to do that. This person on the first question, they did great. That means they should have been a 1 to a 1. The second one, they struggled. So that means they should have been a 0 and a 0. So if we look back here, this first person had a 1 here, and they also had a 1 here. They had a 0 here, and they also had a 0 here. So it does seem to be working there. And what I can do now is I can take these cells and I can copy them down for all our students. And so now all of a sudden we have an indication of who was struggling. This person looks like they were struggling all the way through, or I'm sorry, this question, or the question that people struggled all the way through. Here's another one where they struggled, at least everybody but one person struggled on this question. And then the other thing we can do now is, and the reason I added these columns at the beginning is what we now want to do is sum up how many times each one of these students struggled or slipped or improved. So what I can do now is do what we call this count. So we're going to do equal Countif. Oops, spell it right. And so now we're going to say is in this range, so from the first to the last question here, how many times do we find the word struggle? So Countif says, give me a range. So the range is this range for this student. And the criteria is going to be the cell right above it, the word struggle. And so we find out that this person using this Countif statement struggled 2 times. Again, we're doing this for 10. It could be that there were 30 questions or some other number that makes it that much harder to calculate. Now what we want to do is we want to copy this so that we can count the number of times the students slipped, improved, and did great. Now, if I copy this from left to right, remember these references, G8, B8, C7, are going to change. That when you copy from left to right, it automatically is going to change it by increasing the columns. So from G, it went to H. From P8, it went to Q8. And from C7, it went to D7. When I am counting, I always want to count, in this case, I want to count the same range. So I don't want the G8 to change. I always want it to go from G to P. So I'm going to put a $sign in front of each of those. And then when I look for struggling, I do want it, when I copy this from left to right, I want to go from struggling to slip. But when I copy this down later, I'm not going to want to go from row 7 to 8 because the word slip is always in the top. So I'm going to make the 7 reference, put a reference in front of that so that stays the same. So now when I copy it from here to here, let me keep going. We can now see that this student had 2 times they struggled, and that's looking in this range for the cell in C7, which is struggle. Apologize for that. And then the C7 went to D7, E7, and all staying in 7. Now I can copy this down by selecting these double clicking, and now it copies these to these other rows, and it's correctly keeping, although keeping the G to the P the same. So now we're looking at G11, which is the row we're in. And so this is the range it's looking at now. So each time it now copied the correct range. And so now we can see that this student is a student that was struggling on 5 items and slipped on 1. This is a student that struggled on 4. Maybe we want to even create a column because we want to focus on students who are struggling or slipping. And so maybe we create a column that says struggle or slip. We just let be this, adding these 2 fields together, struggle and slip. We can now just double click in the bottom right corner here. It automatically will copy those down. And you'll hear the students that we see are struggling or slipped. Okay. So this is one way that we're able to take the series, both the pre-test and post-test. We're able to use Vlookup and Countif, and we were able to come up with a total number of times that the students struggled. Let me pause for a minute and see if there's any questions. Are there any?
There aren't any questions right now. So I think we're good. We might just wait just a second and then maybe go back.
Okay. Last thing while we're waiting is the other thing we talked about is wanting to get the names for these students. Let me just show you there. We've already done these functions, but we'll do it one more time. So I can do a Vlookup. So here we've got these student IDs, and we want to look up this student ID to get his or her name from my list of names here. And this might have just been downloaded from your student information system. So now I can just say equal Vlookup. Again, equal lets you do a function. Vlookup is the function I want to look at. I want to look up this value. So that's the lookup value. I then put a comma and I say, okay, what's the array where I want to look up for that? And I want to look that up in my array here, array being a series of numbers or a series of cells. And then from the table, once I've entered the table array, the next thing it's asking me is for the column index, meaning what column do I want the name to come from? And the name is going to be in the second column. And then again, typically I say I want an exact match, so false, to make sure I've got an exact match. And that brings us the name jump. Now again, if I was just to copy this down to all these cells, we'll see it's not working completely right. And that's because, again, I don't want this range A1 to B5. When I move that down, that shouldn't become A2 to B6 and A3 to B7, right? This range that I'm looking for the word John in is always from row 1 to row 5. So again, I would put a little $sign in front of my 1 and a $sign in front of my 5. And now if I copy it all the way down, again, just double click on that right corner, we now are getting the right names because each time it's looking for this student ID in the same range, A1 to B5, that's coming from this sheet. Okay, I'm going to pause for one more second, and then we'll keep going.
So Mike, just a quick clarification. So now that you have the names in there, do they have to keep that column B for the student ID because that's what it's referring to? Right, like, so they don't want to delete column B, you want.
Say that one more time.
So now that they have the first names in there,
How can they delete this column?
You could delete that column.
No, I'm sorry. Good, I got the question. No.
Yeah.
So that is a great question, and I'm glad you asked it. So if I delete this cell, just delete this one value, then John can't be found anymore because it doesn't. I'm going to do a Control Z or Command Z to get it back because it can't find that value. So something I will frequently do, a couple of things I'll frequently do, and it's just another kind of probably good piece of advice, is I will save a file as I do these types of things with different versions, especially in Google Sheets. You can go back to versions. In Excel, it's not quite as easy. So in Excel, I actually saved this off as a different version. So I originally had this file called 1.2021 School D Modular Math. I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to say file save as, and I'm going to save this as a different name. So instead of one, I'll call this one Mike. Sorry, I didn't even spell it right. Then what I would do, so now I've got a version of it. And then maybe I'll even, and then what I would do is I would copy everything I have here. So if you go, you highlight everything, you say edit copy, and then you do a paste special. Paste special allows you to paste values. And so if you paste the value, then you're going to see all these formulas that I had in here, like this formula that was a Vlookup before, now just has the word John in it instead of Vlookup. These things that did if counts don't have counts anymore, or Countifs don't have counts anymore. They just have total numbers. And so now you can delete anything you want. Now you could delete this column. This is still going to be the word John. Maybe you don't care about this detail anymore. Anything you want to get rid of, you don't need to keep it anymore. Okay. I think I'm going to have to go. I'm going to go back to the presentation because I know we're actually coming short on time already. And let me go through some more slides, and then I'm going to give you another example. So the next example I'm going to give you, and I apologize again because I know this is going to go faster than I wish it had to, is we're going to create. We're going to take a look at some additional functions. We're going to take a look at copying with a sequence. So I'll show you how you can make a sequence copy easily from a 1 to a 2 to a 3. We'll do some inserting. We're going to freeze a pane. We are going to modify a student ID. We're going to do some jumping where you can jump to the bottom of lots of rows. We're going to do some deletion of cells, likely. We'll do what's most importantly, we're going to do what's called a pivot table and some charts. And so the next few slides talk through all these. And so you've got access to these slides, and please take a look at them. But I'm not going to spend too much time on this because I want to start the demo right away so we can go through it. But realize so many of the things I do are explained with these slides. So this shows you how to copy. If you've got SAM1 and SAM2, automatically copy it all the way down, and it automatically changes the number 3, 4, 5, 6. How you can insert columns, how you can freeze a pane, so you can freeze some rows, it's columns at the top of a sheet. How you can modify a value, and so that rather than showing a student ID, you're showing something else that's not quite exactly the student ID, in case you want to make that private. How you can jump to the end. So if you hold the shift key down and you do what's you hold the shift key down and then you click with the control and the down arrow, that lets you select, and we'll talk through that. Selects you a whole group of rows, and then we'll do some deletions. We'll do a pivot table, and then a couple of charts.
So Mike, just to clarify, we had one last question. So if you add to your student name or list when you're combining things like that, it will automatically update the list, correct?
Absolutely. Yep. If I hadn't had John on my list and I later add John, then as long as you've got that Vlookup, all of a sudden John would appear.
Thank you.
Okay, next thing I want to do is this next example, we're going to have 3 files that we downloaded. Again, this might have come from NHSAS, Cambium, could have come from some other tool, Performance Plus, for those of you who are using that. And in this example, we've got 3 files that came down, and it brought back a bunch of students. It brought back their score for the different questions that they had, and it came back whether they were above, approaching, or low proficient. So what we're going to do here is we are going to take these, and actually I didn't do this exactly. I'm going to have to delete some of this because I actually was practiced on this earlier, and so we're further down the road than I was supposed to be. Okay, so we've got 3 sheets. This is the first one. We have another one that is for school B. So this is we've got multiple schools here. So these are this is school B. And then I'm going to do 2 things right here. One thing I'm going to do is I'm going to close this other file just so we get it out of the way. Bear with me for a second. Okay. I'm going to hold down, and I've got an Apple, so it's Command tilde. Tilde should be the last item up to the left of the number 1. I'm not sure if it's the same on a PC. For me, it's command. For you, it's control. But if you do command tilde, you're going to see this worksheet number 3 switches to number 4, switches to number 2. So if you've got multiple windows open, if you hold the command tilde down, that switches between your different windows. So you'll see here we've got school B. If I do command tilde here, school A is the second file. And this actually should have been school B. This should actually be school C. Oh, it is, it's school C. So what we want to do is we want to combine all schools into the same file. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to insert a record so we know which school we're dealing with. So this is, so I've highlighted B. I right mouse click or double click and click insert. And I'm just going to type in here school, this is school C. So I'm going to put school C here. I'm going to highlight that and just click twice on the bottom right corner of that cell, and it's automatically knows to copy it all the way down to the end here. I'm then going to go command tilde to my next file. So switching to my file that says school B, and we are going to select the data so that we can copy it from all these students and their results to that first file. Now I've got a lot of results. So actually, let me show you how we do this jumping. So I'm going to hold the shift key down and the control key down, and I'm going to click my arrow to the right, and that automatically jumps me to the end of the columns. It senses when there's no more data. And I'm going to hold the shift. I'm still going to keep the shift key and the control key down. I'm going to click the down arrow. Oops. Sorry. Yeah. Try it one more time. Shift control to the right, and then the down arrow, and that automatically jumped all the way to the bottom of the file. Now I'm going to go in the middle of the data anywhere in the gray, and I'm going to click with 2 fingers. I'm going to say copy, and now that automatically copied that area. So again, I hold shift control and jump to the right, shift control, jump down. Now I've got everything copied. Now I'm going to go back to my school A, I believe it was, or was it B? Nope, back to school B, which the file I'd started to work on. Oh no, I'm sorry. I was copying B. Now we're going to jump to C. And I'm going to paste here what I just copied. And so now we have all the students with their questions for this test. However, for this school. But now I had added school to the prior one. And so now these columns aren't lining up. You'll see student ID is here, but student ID is over here. So what I need to do is I need to shift all of this data that I just copied. Again, I can just click on this cell, hold shift control and push the down arrow. And now if I click right and I click with my 2 fingers and I click insert, now because I've just got certain cells selected, it's going to say when I insert, what should I do? Should I push things, the cells to the right, to the left? What I want to do is I want to shift the cells to the right. So now I've got space for my school. And so now I can type in here, school, this came from, I'm going to guess it was school B. And I can double click on here again, and now it copied it all the way down to the bottom. I can, if I want to make sure these rows are all, columns are all lining up correctly, I'm actually going to take this where it has the question ID, here, question 2, 3, 4, 5. And I'm going to go under, I want to freeze this. And so I'm going to click on page layout. Nope, I'm going to click on view, excuse me. And I'm going to say freeze, freeze pane. And now you'll see that this top columns are staying, these top rows are staying the same. And so now I had copied in the heading from that school B, and I can see QA2, QA3, QA4, 5, 6, 7, these are all lining up. So I just want to make sure they were in the same order. I was pretty sure they were, but I wanted to verify it. So now I can highlight that row that I don't need. And now I've got school C, school B. And if I go here, I can now go to our last file, which was school A. I will select the first from the top of the students, shift control down, shift control right, command C or control C will copy it. I can go back over to my other file and I can paste it. Once again, I select that cell and I go to the bottom and I can insert, push things to the right. Now I can call this is school, I believe this is school A. And I can double click on it and it'll copy it all the way down. I see that my questions are still lining up, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And so I can delete these. And now I have one file that has all the data. Now what I want to do is I want to create a file that has a total number of students in each school that were approaching, on or above, or low, so that I can get a sense of how students are doing in each one of the schools. And so what I'll do here is I'm going to use a pivot table. So I'm going to select the cells that I care about. That's the students with really just from the student to where we've got their performance. And I'm going to select all the way down to the bottom using that shift control button. And now I'm going to say insert, maybe I'm doing this right, is it insert or data? No, it's probably under data. And I want to add a pivot table. So if I go to, I believe it's data analysis. No, sorry, I'm not used to doing it this way. If I go under here, all the things that I practiced before was not this one. Oh, here we go. They've changed the name. So if you click under data and then you say summarize with pivot table, a pivot table basically pivots on certain cells and aggregates for you. So I'm going to pivot into it and it's going to put it in a new table, a new sheet. I'm sorry, this is the range I'm doing. What am I doing here? I'm going to try this one more time. Oh, I didn't have school name here. You have to have a name for a column heading for each of the fields when you do a pivot table. I didn't have school name there. I think that was the problem. So let me try that one more time. I select it all and I go again under data, summarize with pivot tables. And this is the area that I'm summarizing. I'm going to put it in the new worksheet. And what a pivot table lets me do is it lets me say what fields, in this case, school name. I think I want to do this where I put the school name on the top. I can't remember how I did this. And then we want the performance level to be a row. And I want the number of students the count of students for each one of those. And so now we've got school A, school B, and school C. We've got whether they were approaching, low, or on or above. And so school A, for example, had 23 students that were approaching, 8 students that were low, and 8 that were on or above. What I might want to do, because we've got different numbers of students in each school, and we want to look at how schools are doing, is I may want to look at percentages. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy these fields. I think what I'm going to do, I'm going to copy this table. So I'm going to highlight it and copy. And I'm going to do what's called paste special, which we saw before. So I'm just going to paste the values. And what we now want is we actually want this value of 23 to be a percentage. And it's the same value up here. So really what I want is the value of this number 23 divided by the grand total, which is 70. I'm going to do this a different way because that makes it a little bit too complicated. I'm going to copy, because these are actually complex formulas that are in here, but when I pasted these are just the values, 23, 8, and so on. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to copy and create another table below this, just with these headings. And what we're going to say is this value 23, we really want it to be 23 divided by 78, which is the percentage. And I can now change this so that it's a percentage and it's 29%. I'm going to copy this, but remember when I copy it, I want the B to change, I want the 12 to change, but I want the E12 to remain the same. I don't want it to be moving over from E. I'm going to make that a $sign. So now when I copy that to the right, we have the total percent. I can copy it down. And now we have the percentage for school A that was above, low, and on or above, approaching low, and the same for B and C. Now I can take these cells and I actually can go, and if I want to create a graph, I can go under insert. I'm sorry, user here, insert. And then I want to choose a bar chart. And this now tells me for approaching, It looks like school B has a higher percentage of students approaching. Let me make sure I did this right. When I did these averages, I averaged them based on the grand total that way. What I should have done is averaging them based on the grand total of that school. And so let me just do that one more time. So instead of dividing it by E12, what I should have done is divided it, thank you, Heather, I know you're about to say it, by B15. And again, the same thing as when I copy this down, I don't want the 15 to change. It's always going to be B15. And so now we see that school A had 59% approaching, 21% were low, and 21% were on or above. That's the 23 to 8 and 8. Here again, with 53% were approaching, and so on. And now we can see for school A, B, and school C, the number of students approaching, the number of students low, and the number of students on or above is fairly consistent. It looks like maybe the percentage of students who are low are a little bit higher at school A than school B. So a little bit of information about these schools. I am going to do one more of these pivot tables just to show you one more example of how you can do this. This is going to be fairly fast, but again, you can watch the recording, go through it more slowly if you want. I'm going to select all the cells again. I'm going to do the same thing where we did before, where we go under data, or this data, and we say summarize with pivot tables. I'm going to take this area that I've just selected. This time we are actually going to take each question. So we're going to take all these questions. I don't want to. We're going to select all these questions. And we're going to make, sorry. So much for doing this fast. We want to make, what I want to be doing is making these columns. And it's not doing it. For some reason, I thought I should be able to just check them, but it looks like I've got to pull them in here. Let me start with the school name down here.
Mike, while you're doing that, there's a question that can you freeze both a column and a row? Yes, you can freeze rows and columns. I just wanted to answer that live while you were doing what you were doing there.
Thank you. Something is not doing what I want it to be doing. Maybe I didn't select the right columns to start with. I'm going to try this one more time. And I apologize for those of you who may have to leave because I know we're approaching the end of the session. We will have this recorded, and you definitely can go and look at the recording at another time. There's something wrong, I believe, because of the format of these questions. So I'm just going to change this to be Q2, Q3, and see if this helps us.
So Mike, we also just, while you're doing that, I'll answer the question. It says, I don't have the drop-down menu on data. So for those of you who don't necessarily see that, it's also in the insert portion. So if you click on your insert, it's one of the icons that should say pivot table there. So you should be able to.
I am going to cheat. So I'm going to open up, because I did this earlier today, and see if I can't get this in another version, one I've already done. Okay, let me try this again. So what I wanted to do was highlight these. And you have to go over the top data too, not the data in Excel. I think what is happening is maybe I have to change this to sum, because I thought this should happen automatically. Okay, I apologize. Let me get you back to this worksheet. We're going to get rid of this. What I was trying to do was a pivot table, and I will figure out what the problem was, and you can send out an explanation to it. But this pivot table did the same thing we did before. It's got school A, school B, and school C, but now it has a total number of students that got this question right, and so on. And so rather now than just seeing the total number of students who are proficient, we're now seeing the total number of students who got each one of these questions right. I then went ahead and did a sum of these. So I looked at, what I did was I transposed these. So this is the pivot table that's created. And actually I can do this part of it from scratch. Get rid of this. So what I was hoping to do was get this pivot table and then select this pivot table. And if I copy it, what you can do is transpose it to swap the rows and the columns. So now I can say edit, paste special, and I'm going to paste just the values, and I'm going to transpose them. And so what that does is now it makes, instead of these being columns, these are rows. And so now I know the sum of question question 2 was 37. The sum for school B was 70, etc. But they're going the other direction. Now what I can do is also come up with the percentages. So I know for school A, they had actually this percentage of students had it correct. I want to keep the last reference steady. And then I can do this for school B and school C. So this should be showing me what percentage of the students got each one of these questions right. And I can make all of these percents. And again, I'm going to just copy over these school headings. And now you can actually select cells independently. So I hold those cells together. Oops, sorry, I select these cells that I want to graph. I hold down the control button. Oops, not control button. On my computer, I guess it's the command button. And now I can graph these. And we're going to graph these, again, going under insert, or insert on this, insert on the lower bar here. And we're going to graph what's called a scatter plot. And this now shows me for each one of the questions how many students got it right. And so for question 1, for all these schools, almost 98% of the students got it right. For question 2, most of the schools struggled. It looks like this school struggled the most. And so now we can see very quickly that it looks like question 2 and question 6 and question 8 were the ones where the students struggled the most, except for this school where maybe some of the students also had trouble with this question. So it's another way to graph it, make it a way that kind of pops out at you and lets you see fairly easily where your students might be struggling. Okay, I struggled with keeping on time, so let me go back to our slides here real quickly. We went through quite a bit there. Hopefully that was helpful. Most importantly, know we're here to help. So review these different pages to see how the different things we were doing in terms of creating charts, etc. The transposing. Please ask any questions. We'll post either this video or another recording of this so that you'll have it for future reference as well. A couple other things to point out with, we used the Vlookup, the Countif function. There are a couple of functions we used. If you go under insert functions, you can see a whole long list of many functions. Here are some of the functions that I use quite frequently. If you want to look at a string or within a string, there's something called the find, the write, length. These are things that let you pull out a subset of information. So, different ways that you can manipulate strings. There's something called if error. Sometimes, like if you're doing a division where you're dividing one cell by another and you're trying to divide by 0, it's going to give you an error. So you can actually do something that says if error and then put your function inside that. And that will allow you to put something graceful in as opposed to having it say that there's an error. Random numbers, you can do some random number stuff. Indirect is a very powerful function, so I encourage you to look at that as well. Finally, I was trying to talk about help. There's embedded help, so I encourage you to use the embedded help. This is a great website, exceljet.net, where you can get help. Most importantly, just Google. If I Google if function in Excel, and you get 1,000 examples. It's nothing better than trying to Google, functions within Excel to get help. And then finally, you can also YouTube. You can Google for a YouTube video, and there'll be videos for all these different things. So with that, I'm going to tell you some of the upcoming webinars. We've got a couple coming up on understanding the NHSCS and the SAT, looking at that data that's going to be released at the end of May. At least you'll have access to once your students take the test. And then finally, there's a survey, so please complete the survey when you get the link after this webinar. And here's our information if you've got questions. I apologize, there was so much to go through in a short period of time, but hopefully this was somewhat helpful. And by all means, please reach out to me anytime if you need some individual help. I'm happy to help. Heather, Annie, any other questions?
Nope. A lot of people saying thank you. Appreciate you all coming this afternoon. The recording will be available. Like Mike said, we might have an additional recording with a couple of things, but thanks for your time today. Please it takes just a couple minutes to finish the survey. To fill it out, it will pop up as soon as you log off of here. So thanks again.